Okay, well look, thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. Is that recording okay? Does that sound as if it's working? Keep going. Okay. This will be light on data, so really the PowerPoint is there's hopefully some nice pictures and images here to give you something to look at over the next 40 minutes or so. But I would, thank you for that introduction. And I guess by way of adding a little bit more of introduction, I'll give you some of my sort of impressions since I arrived. I arrived Wednesday afternoon, which was, I noticed the day of Prince George's christening, and it received, I'm sure it received as much coverage in Australia as it did in the UK. It makes me think about when I do see the news, what's on the news when you come to a country for, to sort of orientate yourself. So I turned on the news my first night here, and there was the debate in Parliament about energy prices and about freezing prices and green tape and increased competition and so on, and energy pricing to the consumer. There was the story about closing the plant, the chemical and refinery in Scotland. These are very topical things that are happening in Australia at the moment as the Australian economy is adjusting to some structural change, some of its manufacturing industries being stressed. The energy conversation about pricing is absolutely a very topical thing in Australia. There was also news about an English rugby league player who was punished for drinking and kicked off his team. That's a universal story. But the one that caught me was that they closed a school this week for spiders. Did anyone see the news that there was a school that got closed for spiders? I thought, in Britain, how do you close school for spiders? Apparently you have a false widow spider that can make you a bit sick if it bites you. Now, I'm from Australia, okay? I couldn't let that story go by without talking about spiders and other things. So the popular stories about Australia. So I did go to Sydney's Taronga Zoo a couple of weeks ago and took my children there. We do have the deadliest spiders in the world. The funnel web spider, which I got to hold in a little jar and shaking, my hands were shaking like this too. The male funnel web spider is the deadliest in the world, and it's killed dozens of people this year, but this century, but it hasn't, over the last 100 years, but it hasn't killed people for the last 20 years because the scientists at CSIRO developed an antivenom. So spiders, we've got the worst ones, but I also happen to live in the shark attack capital of the world. There's been lots of coverage of shark attacks, and needless to say, I'm not a regular goer to the beach, even though we do have beautiful beaches in Australia. But interestingly, researchers at UWA have proven that sharks are actually colourblind. So there's a popular view that, I think in the 50s and 60s, that was called yum yum yellow, that the Americans determined that certain colours were attracting sharks. But researchers at UWA proved that sharks can only see sort of shades of grey. And so they've designed some new suits for surfers and divers that help to deal with shading and to help disguise the divers and the surfers and sunlight contrast, and also to band their suits so they look like toxic sea snakes and so on. So I have every confidence in our researchers, but I still wouldn't go in the ocean. Very regularly, I'm still a bit quiet about that. In the introduction, you mentioned that I'm from the UK, so I was born here but emigrated in the early 70s, as did a lot of people from this part of the world. There was an encouraged program of emigration to Australia, and so most of my father's family emigrated, and we made Perth our home. So Perth's the capital of Western Australia, and if I was giving this presentation at the University of Western Australia, I'd also acknowledge that we were meeting in Perth on the lands of the Noongar people. So Indigenous Australians have actually lived in Australia for over 40,000 years, and so they have a very rich and significant tradition. But the last 200 years is not a particularly positive story about Indigenous Australia. So I would, if I was giving this presentation at UWA, acknowledge that we met on their land. But Perth is the capital of Western Australia. Australia is the 6th biggest country in the world by land area. So it's as big as Western and continental Europe sort of combined. And WA itself, we're to sort of beat our chest with the Americans, is 3.5 times bigger than Texas. It covers 1/3 of the Australian continent, but it only has about 10% of the population. So 1/3 of the continent of 24.5 million people. We've got about 2.5 million people in a state that's 3 times the size of Texas. But we are a significant resources economy. So our trade statistics are pretty impressive, and we've gone through a period of over 2 decades of consistent economic growth year on year. And the relationship that we have with trading partners in Japan and China account for a major share of that, that economic growth. But somewhat underappreciated is, while gold, iron ore and coal are sort of our top 3 resource exports, education and education services is the 4th in the mix. So we've been a major exporter of education out of our university sector for the last decade. So Australian universities and the CSIRO, our national research organisation, are genuinely world-class organisations. And in the financial press last year, there was a statistic that was put out, and I like quoting this to give a sense of the fact that we have a good innovation system. There's actually more Australian universities in the top 500 universities in the world than there are Australian companies in the top 500 universities in the world. Sorry, in the top 500 companies in the world. There are 39 Australian universities, and their average turnover is $500 million per university. And it's been estimated there's a 20% real rate of return on investment in research in our universities. So they're very positive economic statistics about the strength of our system. The National Research Organisation, CSIRO, UWA and Curtin University, which is a university in Perth that we collaborate with a lot, if you combine those resources, it'd be a $3 billion organisation that employs 12,000 people with 75,000 students. So we do have large research organisations of some capacity. International universities are welcome and have a presence in Australia, and UCL established a campus in 2009 in Adelaide in South Australia, which is in the middle of the bottom of the country. And I'm actually a master's candidate in that program, the Masters of Energy and Resource Management at UCL. I'm about halfway through, and it does intensive week-long courses and then the exams and papers that you do afterwards. But so that's a little bit of context setting, and but I think I'll come back to my premise, is that I think we underestimate and undervalue the economic drivers that exist in our innovation system. And I think most of us here would appreciate that universities offer important social, cultural and community benefits. And I'm trying to correct a bit of the misunderstanding that some of our people have, that universities are not real generators of value for commerce and industry. The term public good is sometimes applied a little too lazily to the sector to avoid, I think, a more effective understanding of the value and impact of the sector. This is something that I work very hard at in our institute, and we take this work very seriously in terms of engaging with industry, government and civic society to really demonstrate the value of our research institutes. So I think I should click a slide here. Oh, there we go. So there's a picture of Perth, our capital city, at night. It's a lovely city on the Swan River. The tallest building in the middle there is BHP's headquarters, which you'd expect, so that's the 2-towered Brookfield place. But the university's established an office in that same precinct, so we're part of that precinct as well. But Woodside, Chevron, Shell, ExxonMobil, all major companies have a significant presence in Perth. So Perth is located in the same zone with the fastest growing economies in the world. By some projections, by 2025, the economy of the Asia Pacific will be bigger than North America and Western and Central Europe combined. So the rise of the middle class and increased urbanisation in Asia is really transforming that region. Perth itself is now ranked as the most important energy city in Australia, and the West Australian minerals and energy exports account for over half of Australia's total resource exports. It's a significant resource economy with over 500 commercial mineral projects producing more than 50 different minerals, and some of those are in the top, as just a state, some of those minerals are in the top 5 producing regions in the world for their particular commodity. So there's been a tremendous transformation of the West Australian economy over the last decade. So at the start of the last decade, our largest resource customer was Japan, to whom we sold 50% of the state's petroleum production and 44% of our iron ore. And we talked about non-Japan Asia as a grouping of countries that included China, India and South Korea. 10 years later, the story of non-Japan Asia has unfolded to an extent that few of us could have predicted. So today, almost 2/3 of our exports are destined for those countries, so that's in China and South Korea. And including Japan, more than 85% of our exports go to Asia. And the total value of that is exceeding $100 billion. So that's almost $275 million every single day of the year in terms of export value going into those regions. And petroleum products, iron ore and gold, comprise almost 88% of that total. And almost half of the value of merchandise exports out of Australia come from Western Australia. So clearly I'm trying to emphasise we're a resources economy in a great location, so we definitely rely on resources. Our institute, the Energy and Minerals Institute, has really been part of a process of trying to reframe thinking around the location of the university, the location of the state, and its orientation towards resources and innovation and geopolitical significance. So one of the things we did was really orientate ourselves to say we actually now exist in the same time zone in Western Australia as 60% of the world's population. Traditionally we think of Australia as very remote, but we now orientate ourselves to think of the region that we're in as that of the most fastest growing economies in the world. And we no longer have this tyranny of distance, which is a phrase coined by a famous Australian historian that helped really frame the national psyche over generations.
How long does it take to fly to, say, Tokyo?
It's 4.5 to 5 hours to Singapore, and Tokyo would be another 4 or 5 hours on from there. It took me about 26 hours to get here, 2 flights, and I may fall over at any time, but no, I should be fine. But it is interesting. Most orientations you think by latitude and not by longitude. And the distances are great. To fly from, when I took my children for a week away a couple of weeks ago, and we went from Perth to Sydney and to Canberra, the national capital, and it's 4.5 hours in a jumbo plane to fly from one side to the other to go from Perth to Sydney. So it is a large continent, but the significant proportion of the working population in Western Australia, so there's 150,000 people I think working in the resources sector. I think 30 or 40% of them fly in and fly out. So there's a 3-hour plane flight to go to the northwest, or people fly in and fly out from Melbourne or from Brisbane to go to the Pilbara, which is our northwest region where the significant resource projects are. So I think we think of distances differently. But I am visiting my grandmother tomorrow, who lives in Ashford, and I do. She's stayed in a very particular location for most of her life. She once went on a plane to go to Australia about 15 years ago. And this is not scripted, but it just is a funny story. She got on the plane and was sitting next to my mum, who was bringing her over to see her grandchildren and so on, took off, and as the plane levelled out, she said to my mum, "Why has the plane stopped?" And she says, "We haven't stopped, we're going several hundred kilometres an hour." She hadn't appreciated, I think she thought that for 20 hours she was going to be sucked into the back of the chair all the way to Australia, because it was such an unusual thing to get on a plane and to go from a small suburb in a council flat in Ashford to actually get to the other side of the world. It's shrinking, but the distances still are great. Anyway, so I will talk about Australian innovation to really reinforce we're not just a giant quarry and a once great Australian cricket team. So our sporting nation is not so longer something I'll talk about, and I won't talk about sharks and spiders anymore, but I will talk about science and innovation in Australia. There are some products that I guarantee you that you've got access to Australian technology on you right now, and it's in this room. But the bionic ear, I assume none of you have bionic ears, but that was developed in Australia. The heart pacemaker, I hope none of you have heart pacemakers. The black box flight recorder, I hope none of you have to use that particular technology. Relenza flu antivirals. Polymer banknotes. So the CSIRO developed a banknote technology that's now, I think, licensed to 21 countries around the world. And it has a number of important characteristics to avoid fraud and built-in counterfeiting technology, but it's also advanced use of polymers that's now being extended to develop technology around potentially printing solar panels for combining solar panel technology into the printing for windows and so on. So that comes out of CSIRO. But I just love the fact that we license other countries to print their money using our technology is a nice story. The Bali bombings, the tragedy of the Bali bombings some time ago, the technology to develop spray-on skin for burns victims out of a Perth scientist called Professor Fiona Wood. But the ubiquitous one is the wireless LAN, the wireless technology. So radio astronomers at CSIRO developed the wireless protocols, and we won the court case against all of the companies, the computing companies. And so there's a science and investment foundation that's been established using that windfall funding that benefits all Australian science, but it comes from radio astronomers who used that technology and developed it first of all. Google Maps was developed by some brothers in Sydney, an Australian team. A cure for stomach ulcers. So university has 2 Nobel laureates that developed the antibiotic approach for identifying the bacteria that's in your stomach that makes stomach ulcers. And there's some other medical technologies as well. So that's a little list to say that there are some really positive contributions from science and innovation in Australia. While we're typically characterised as a country that's land of tremendous natural resources, laid back or sort of larrikin people, passionate about sports, and we value mateship above other things, I think we rarely do we promote the contributions of science to commerce and industry, and they're rarely front of mind when we discuss business in Australia. With respect to mining, just as a front of mind observation, 60 to 70% of the mining software that supports automation and processing in the mining industry is developed out of Perth. And that's something that you could probably ask most people in Perth, what were we good at? They wouldn't explain that because they don't appreciate it. It's in their own door. We have remote operations centres, so we've got world-leading mine operations. So Rio Tinto, with their Mine of the Future program, has a remote operations centre at Perth Airport, with BHP doing a similar sort of activity. They effectively have a high-tech centre at Perth Airport that is controlling operations in the Pilbara 1,500 kilometres away, from driverless trucks to trains that are 2 to 3 kilometres long that are being filled, all remotely, all with automation that they can see in these advanced remote operations centres. It's amazing technology, it's amazing use of innovation and an application that can potentially apply to other industries, medical industries in remote locations and so on. So we really need to take advantage of that innovation and really export that positive story to the rest of the world. The global energy company Chevron has established one of only 2 global technology centres in Perth. Its other one is in Aberdeen, and there's a major centre in Houston. But the role of that centre is to develop the new technologies required to facilitate exploration for energy supplies, so for gas in remote locations. And it saw, when it identified Perth, why would it do it in Perth? As it's an ideal location. Its proximity to Asia Pacific, but the growing reputation of the city as an excellently located centre of operations, and importantly, the relationships with the research community. So the alliances with universities and CSIRO were fundamentally important to that company making a decision to invest in the region. As a result, UWA partners with Chevron's University Partnership Program and joins the likes of Stanford and MIT and others in supporting science. Now, I don't know if that's in the next slide or not. I'll talk about that in a second, but Chevron's invested several $1 million to endow chairs in gas process engineering, and some of their work is something I'll highlight in a few minutes. Shell's done the similar thing, so we've had Shell invest in geotechnical chairs at UWA, and they're supporting their efforts to develop floating LNG. So FLNG is a new technology that's being piloted in Western Australian waters by Shell, and the scientists that are there in the university and with colleagues at CSIRO and Curtin University are developing the understanding of the structures and how they interact, their foundations and how their anchoring systems are all going to work. I should have shown this a little earlier, but this is an aerial shot of UWA and Perth City. So I showed you the Perth skyline. So Perth is to the north of the shot, Kings Park, and then the university is on the banks of the Swan River. And we have a college row and a large central campus that's beautifully located and really is an important part of the city. The other side of the river, a little bit out of shot, is there's another precinct where CSIRO and Curtin University operate, and those three organisations add a significant critical mass around resources science and industry engagement that I think is really creating a hub of activity in Western Australia. So I think universities really do drive innovation, and the sector really is important to create the conditions essential for sustained national prosperity. There's been some reviews of university models, and we're going through our own challenges in terms of funding and resourcing in Australia, as I understand that similarly is happening in Europe. But in the review that was undertaken in Australia, one of the reviewers sort of had this quote about what universities do, and I quite liked it, and it reflects both what we do well and some of the challenges. So it says, universities educate our leaders and entrepreneurs of the future. They create new ideas and knowledge and earn much needed export income. Universities provide opportunities for students of all backgrounds to increase standards of living for themselves and future generations. But to succeed, universities will need to forge new business models that are dynamic, modern and fit for the decades ahead. So I've spent my career working in and around universities and research organisations, and I find it a truly rewarding and often inspiring environment in which to work. UWA itself was originally founded through resource-led endowments and philanthropy at the turn of the 20th century, and it really has sustained a very productive relationship with the resources industry throughout its 100 years. So it's celebrating its centenary this year, and it established the Energy and Minerals Institute 4 years ago to further align its core activities with the largest economic sector in Western Australia. So as an institute, we integrate activities across several faculties, and we represent a major point of engagement with industry and government and community groups across the university. The headquarters of our institute is a smaller, if you like, a virtual institute model, and we add a lot of value to other parts of the university by connecting them to opportunities that they would not be otherwise available. And in part, that business development activity is what I'm doing here by visiting London, and also visiting The Hague and Geneva next week to further those industry and intergovernmental relationships. In an institute, we have this tremendous opportunity to work across the entire value chain, and we bring quite a unique perspective to the discipline strengths of the university. And in my brief chat with colleagues before the lunchtime seminar, I got that same insight from here at UCL. You bring an insight that's multidisciplinary, and you bring both the internal strengths of the university to the outward challenges that are facing our world. So if I now drill down a little bit further, I've tried setting the scene about Western Australia and our resources economy, a little bit of insight into Australian universities as a system and some of the background to UWA. Now I'll go down a little further into some of the research highlights. So natural gas is a big story at UWA. We're a beautiful campus. We're very proud of our campus. So that's, I should say, that's Winthrop Hall and the University Senate Room to the right. I said it's not a data-rich presentation. It's just some nice pictures. But this is getting closer to the science. I should ask, how many people in the room been to Australia? I meant to ask that question earlier. On study exchanges, holidays? Study holidays. And did anyone get to Perth? Was any? You fly over Perth to go to Sydney, you went to Perth?
Yeah, I was born in Perth, so I've only there for 6 months, I don't remember much.
Well, we can share stories. I had 3.5, 4 years in the UK, I don't really remember very much as well, but I still supported the English cricket team for 40 years, so there you go. No, that's interesting to see. A lot of people, most people do skip over Western Australia to go to the eastern states and visit Sydney and Melbourne, and one of the things over the last 10 years is a bit of a rebalancing. Given the economic strength of Western Australia and our focus on the region, there is a bit of a national shift towards Western Australia having more economic and geopolitical significance, and it's being in the zone. And that story is also being reflected in Queensland as well, which is similarly on the back of a strong resource endowment. And gas is a key part of that story. So we've got an estimated 819 trillion cubic feet of gas resources, And with gas discoveries literally happening, it feels like every other week that Chevron or Shell or Woodside is announcing another discovery off our northwest. And clearly gas is part of a transition option to a lower carbon future. And we've got almost $200 billion worth of LNG projects in the pipeline, and with FLNG technology coming on stream in 2 to 3 years' time, we're likely to rival Qatar as the world's leading LNG producer within the next decade. But it's not just conventional production. We are also pioneering innovations in floating LNG. And floating LNG essentially takes the onshore production process and shrinks it down to sit on a vessel that then sits over the reservoir in the ocean. So it's quite an engineering advance to take a process that might sit over a few hectares and shrink it down to what will still be the largest vessel ever built, but put it in a vessel and extract and process that gas, and then have the LNG tankers come up to its for offtake in the ocean, 300 or 400 kilometres offshore. So it's a significant development. But the eastern states of Australia are developing coal seam gas, so there's something akin to the shale gas story happening in Australia as well. We've got advanced technologies that deal with operations in quite extreme environments. So the northwest of Western Australia, where all of the gas is, and the iron ore projects, is also a very highly cyclone-prone environment. So the engineering expertise required to operate in that environment is something that's developed over the last 20 and 30 years. So they're all elements that make our LNG production world-leading. And our researchers are a key part of that. Now, this particular image is of a beam centrifuge, and our Centre for Offshore Foundation Systems is world-leading in using this technology to model the interaction of the structures on the seabed. So the pipelines and the foundation structures are modelled at scale, sit inside this bucket, and it spins around at several hundred per second, that then stimulates the what would be the seabed interaction in situ. So they're very advanced sensing and modelling technologies that are able to really then inform the projects that use their models, their designs to develop safer structures and more efficient structures. So they have a staff of 40, and they're really at the forefront of centrifuge technology, and they're involved in all the major oil and gas developments around the world, and consult to projects in the North Sea and in the Gulf of Mexico. And as they go into deeper and deeper waters, this sort of modelling to get the structures safe and designed efficiently are significantly important. We also have a large O-tube, which would be several times larger than this room, that has a 1 metre diameter, that can simulate the operation of a cyclone at the ocean bed. So it's important to have pipelines integrate into the seabed in a particular way to help with their stability and their prolong their life. And so in a cyclone-prone environment, we're able to simulate that and design better pipelines, better anchoring systems using these technologies. So it's very advanced engineering and geotechnical science that is having direct value to industry. Woodside, when designing a pipeline recently, reported a $125 million saving as a result of some advanced PhD student work that said, design the anchors in this way and you need so many of them. And when you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for lengths of pipeline, if you can engineer them more efficiently, you're making significant savings and making projects more economic. That particular student then went on to work at Woodside, I think, and earns squillions now. So, okay. So that whole interaction, engineering interactions in ocean environments, is something that's we have deep discipline expertise, and something that's building very strong relationships with industry, but has 40 PhD students, has visiting scholars that come from all around the world. It's a really rich academic environment and a very positive one. Our colleagues, I talk about geosequestration. Carbon storage is a big topic in Australia as well as it is in Europe. 60% of Australia's research expertise in geological carbon storage is based in Perth. And Western Australia will soon host the world's largest geosequestration project. So attached to Gorgon, the Chevron project, the LNG project up in the northwest, is a process to strip out the CO2 and inject it underneath Barrow Island, which is a nature reserve, and inject 3 to 4 million tonnes a year of CO2 into that reservoir underneath the reserve. We've got scientists that have been monitoring that in situ environment, that have also been doing the soil gas monitoring and the advanced repeat seismic, the 4D seismic imaging processes for that project and for other projects in Australia. And that's an area of quite some strength, and work that's done with CSIRO and Curtin University as well. I highlight the computational geoscience, or geoscience generally. This is a picture of a supercomputer. We have one of the world's top supercomputers that's recently been commissioned in Perth, and that was attached to a radio astronomy project, the Square Kilometre Array, which we're jointly hosting with research partners in South Africa. And while the supercomputer is going to support radio astronomy, it also supports the fundamental sciences around the resources industry. So our computational geoscientists are using this supercomputer to develop better models and better approaches to resource characterisation and predicting resource availability. And there are some of our centres are world leading in that area and doing work in precincts, particularly in Africa and in Latin America, as well as in Europe. So we're widely regarded as a leader in this particular area. I mentioned gas process engineering and Chevron's investment. This is a picture of Professor Eric May. He's Chevron gas processing chair, and investment by Chevron's enabled his group to grow significantly in recent years. And his work is really in developing technologies that offer the industry the ability to reduce very significant capital costs and to produce the gas in a more environmentally friendly way, a more efficient way, and a way that increases investment attractiveness. So Chevron's investment's significant, and but the talent that's represented in Eric is also significant. So he was awarded the Prime Minister's Medal as the Physical Scientist of the Year in 2012, but he's actually on sabbatical in London at the moment, and he's spending some of his sabbatical at Imperial College, but then spending the second half with Chevron in Richmond and working with their scientists in industry. So it highlights the positive contribution he's making there. And then the last project I was going to mention, I love this picture. We use it in some of our, it's not anything to do with our research, but it's a great way of imaging representing the connectivity and starting to sense the connections that exist around our part of the world. So the bottom left is Perth, and I said Western Australia takes up that much of the continent, and UCL Adelaide is there. I'll say UCL Adelaide has all of those lights emanating from it, and then Sydney and other parts of the state, other parts of the country on the east coast. But I highlight one of the projects that I'm doing with UCL. We did a first up social licence to operate course, and through UCL Adelaide, and as a group of students, we surveyed the top 100 ASX companies with energy in their portfolio, and we did an analysis of their social media use with a view of understanding their efforts to obtain a social licence to operate. And we're planning to write this paper up, write up our analysis and write up this paper about the efforts of listed companies to secure a social licence to operate. And I haven't data to present today, but we had some interesting insights into how companies are using websites and LinkedIn and Twitter and so on, and make some observations that it's a very evolving area. It's a place that's done in interesting ways by some companies. Some companies have a note on their Twitter feed that says it's only monitored between 9 and 5 Eastern States time, and still using Twitter. Some of the companies are clearly using LinkedIn as a recruitment vehicle, and some of the energy companies that are in the energy marketing and electricity production and supply and so on have great difficulty in sort of almost outsourcing the customer complaint process into the social media space, and that causes some difficulty as well. So it's a really interesting project that I would like to I'll be sure to follow up with colleagues later in the year as a very practical way that we're doing some work in the student experience in UCL, and trying to make it a contemporary sort of project. So I guess I'll come close to concluding. We're working towards about a 1 o'clock deadline. I wanted to reflect again that while Western Australia is rich in natural resources, and it's an important part of the Australian economy, its ongoing prosperity is aligned to the transformative growth of the region, so Asia's largest nations, to which we supply a wide range of valuable minerals and commodities. And clearly we're in what we can class as an Asian century, and it creates a number of opportunities and challenges for us. As with greater globalisation comes issues of demographic change, social equality, resource distribution, environmental impact and regional security. And I'm sure through both the Sustainable Institute and the Energy Institute here, these are complex problems that you're examining. In Australia, we've got deep trade relationships with Asia, and we're geographically well located. And we're taking great advantage of advances in technology and science and research to inform new thinking and new global networks and new focus on productivity that's required to take advantage of these opportunities. So a recent report from a committee for Perth, which is promoting Perth, really pointed to the state shifting from a reliance on it being a traditional resource or extractives industry to being a key player in corporate leadership, knowledge generation, finance and services. And this tries to reinforce my earlier statement that we're moving from being a resources economy to a knowledge economy, or that in fact a resources economy can be a knowledge economy. So in terms of knowledge-based and supportive industries, examples include the mining software development that I quoted earlier, exploration and subsea processing industry service companies, subsea engineering, mine safety systems, geospatial mapping companies and computer programming, to name just a few. So that for me provides evidence that our resource-based economy is transitioning into more of a highly globally connected knowledge economy, and that Perth's a central hub in that network. So I'm really keen to see we sort of move away from that notion that a resources-driven economy is a low-tech economy. In fact, increasingly, the resources industry of the 21st century is a high-value industry processing, a high-value industry with world-class expertise. What I'm increasingly seeing is that those industries are supported by world-class universities that are collaborating to address a wide spectrum of scientific, technical and social challenges, and invest in the next generation of scientists, researchers, engineers and thinkers. So as a member at UWA, I'm really pleased and proud to be part of that network that contributes to developing scientists and academics in a manner that I really think has been undersold to date. And I think as a university, we are driven by an unprecedented opportunity and the need to build the intellectual infrastructure to sustain prosperity and alleviate poverty through this century and beyond, by nurturing an environment that's really conducive to innovation. I think once we have that capacity for continual innovation, we'll have the ability to respond not only to today's challenges, but tomorrow's. And when I think about, and again perhaps reflecting on the serious side of the news, we still exist in a fairly economically and politically fragile global environment, and we can't be certain of what the tomorrow holds. So that was my conclusion. It's really been a privilege to be here and to share some thoughts with you. To be in London now, I've talked up Perth being a global hub. Perth's an important energy city in Australia, but I've come to what is clearly a very important energy city, and it's been a real privilege to be part of a lunchtime forum with you today. I'm happy to take questions and wish you all the best with your own studies with UCL. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's been really great. And I think the few of us who have not been to Australia yet might have one more reason to go to Australia, in particular to Perth. So that was really excellent. And I reminded myself, a few days ago I was reading the most recent OECD scoreboard on research and innovation. And it was striking that Australia was featuring very high in that scoreboard. So it seemed to be that the OECD and others well acknowledge the kind of knowledge economy that is driving the Australian growth, and might also be, well, a part indeed of what we might now discuss. So the floor is open. Those of you who have questions on Perth, Australia, the university, feel free to ask it. I got it before that you might also be interested in accepting questions which are more of a pragmatic nature. So would it be worthwhile for the PhD students, for the fellows here, to visit your institute and those things? So are the floors open? And given that you do not have too many minutes left, I would suggest just raise your hand, step in, and well, get along.
Hello.
You can identify yourself.
Yes.
And,
Joel Guilbault, I'm doing a PhD here. I'm researching renewable energy and energy storage for mining plants. And as you mentioned, Midwest Australia is very relevant, especially for off-grid location.
Yes.
Is that something you have a focus on in your department, like renewable for mining or energy storage?
It is. It's a very prospective area. We've got some key scientists working in the area of geothermal, and there's a strategy around geothermal in the Pilbara region that's being explored as well. But it's different. I think different geology in the Central Australia as opposed to Western Australia, and I don't know that we've got the right. It's more about using it as a heat sink and not for sort of baseload power production. But there's a couple of wave energy projects in the Midwest, I think and wind projects that have been developed. And our challenge is to connect what are remote distribution systems. Eastern States has one big grid, so unlocking that problem for the mining industry, which is one of the major electricity users in the state. We use a significant amount of the state's electricity to break big rocks into small rocks. Like it's 30 or 40% of our electricity goes down that path. So it's a really important area to try and tackle. Where I'm challenged is that I think our state is not investing enough in science and innovation, so we have to work directly with the companies, and the companies operate in a very competitive environment as well, and would like to see the state provide some leverage support for it. So it's a difficult area. Thank you.
What I took from this OECD report is that Australia is leading in terms of giving tax advantages to companies that invest in R&D. So this might be like the interlinkage, that the state itself invests less, but it gives more benefits to companies that do it, which might explain why companies are indeed then eager to go into the R&D direction, and indeed the kind of direction you indicated is also extremely relevant.
Yeah, we have recently had a change of government in Australia, so we've moved to the right of politics, and there is the new government has yet to sit, and its first two bills that it wishes to promote are the repeal of a carbon tax and the repeal of a mining tax. So quite at different levels. There are challenging signals that they send to both industry and the global community. The repeal of the mining tax, well, they're both designed as a way to create more industry confidence and support in investing in the resources space. But it does make personally me reflect that we are not necessarily tackling some of our. This is being recorded too, so I'm making this a personal. It's fine. I wonder how we're viewed as on a world stage when we are per capita the heaviest CO2 emitters, and we're a resource-intensive and energy-intensive economy. While we're a net exporter of energy, I think we do have our place to play in terms of active steps around CO2 mitigation, and so that's a problematic area. I'll leave our policy and social scientists to help engage on that.
Anybody else? Well, from my own perspective, indeed, the carbon tax debate was also well reflected here in the newspapers, and would really be also interesting to think a bit what might happen in the future. I mean, I was fascinated myself when you shared the future gas perspectives, was that it could well be that Australia might be the main gas exporter to Japan because they have this energy gap, and they are considering imports from Canada, shale gas imports, but they could also import it from Australia, I guess. And so this could be one of the geopolitical game changers in a way. But how do you look at these economic policy application. I mean, if you look at Australia as a model for a resource-based economy, and you look at many new mining countries all over the world, partly from Africa, but also partly from Asia, the kind of idea which they settle is that they might get revenues from the mining, and not only get the companies in, but then use some revenues or taxes to invest into further development. Would you think that Australia has good models for the kind of tax revenue interface to work with companies to lift up itself while being dependent on resources, but then moving into a knowledge economy? Is there any kind of economic policy advice you would like
I think, again, the new government's reviewing our energy policy, and it unfortunately spends too much time focusing, I think, on domestic pricing and not the macro issue around what our significant resource endowment might do to benefit the nation. We have a fairly open market when it comes to trading for energy, so we don't have a sovereign wealth fund, and we don't heavily tax the resource, and that's one of the things the mining rent tax in being repealed is meant to take away. It's meant to take away another layer of tax to act as an incentive for companies to come into Australia. One of the biggest challenges for us is that Australia is a large country, 25 million people, but has 7 states and territories and a Commonwealth government that has certain rights to revenue raising and company taxation and personal taxation, and states that have royalties, can claim the royalties for resources in the ground, but not the company tax arrangements. Or so like I said, so in a sense, to translate it to your situation in the United Kingdom, we perhaps have similar tensions to Scotland and the greater UK in terms of a resource-rich region that can't necessarily get all of the benefits that it wants to get locally because of the super government arrangements that operate. So we've had debates about sovereign wealth funds and looking at the Norwegian examples and so on, but they're not, any of those debates are, I think, are problematic, that we're not going to move too far away from a fairly free market approach to our resources to attract the companies.
Yeah, extremely interesting. I mean, we might compare it also with Chile, which is but another case of an export-oriented, market-oriented country. But I guess the time is almost over. And looking at the clock, I think we scheduled it for 12 to 1, which means probably some, if not many of you, have other deadlines to meet, other important meetings, etc. So thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Mark,
thank you.
for coming a long way. 26 hours, I learned. Will you stay a little bit more and visit your grandma?
I will.
This is a very fortunate situation that we could have you here, and we are very pleased for the kind of insights you shared with us. And I also indeed wish to thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
And then have a great Friday.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Yeah.